At my wedding reception, I saw my mother-in-law slip something into my glass when no one was watching. She thought I would drink it, but I switched our glasses, and when she raised the toast, I smiled. That is when the real wedding drama began. Victoria Sterling stood there in her designer gown, looking like the epitome of grace, completely unaware that she was holding her own downfall. She thought she was subtly removing the unwanted stray from her family. She didn't know I had seen everything in the reflection of the bar mirror. I didn't panic. I didn't make a scene. I just waited, because I knew exactly what was in that vial, and I knew exactly who was about to swallow it. Have you ever had to smile at someone who you knew was trying to destroy you? Drop a yes in the comments if you have ever dealt with a toxic in-law. I want to see how many survivors are here. To understand why a woman would try to poison her son's bride on her wedding day, you have to understand the Sterling estate. It sits on 200 acres of prime Napa Valley soil, behind iron gates that look like they were designed to keep armies out, or maybe keep prisoners in. The vines are perfectly aligned. The hedges are manicured to the millimeter, and the main house looms over the valley like a judge's gavel. It is beautiful, in the way a cage is beautiful if it is made of gold. My husband, Matthew, grew up there, but he never really belonged. He was too warm for a place that cold. I, on the other hand, came from nowhere. Foster homes, state schools, shared apartments with peeling paint. But I built a life. I became an art restorer. My entire career is built on patience and observation. I take damaged, dirty canvases, and I find the truth underneath the grime. I know how to spot a fake brushstroke from a mile away. I know how to tell when a layer of varnish is hiding a crack in the foundation. And from the moment I met Victoria Sterling, I knew exactly what I was looking at. She was perfect on the surface. The philanthropy awards on the mantle, the tailored Chanel suits, the way she commanded a room with just a tilt of her chin. But I restore masterpieces for a living, and I know a forgery when I see one. Victoria was a forgery. She wasn't strong, she was brittle. She wasn't noble, she was terrified. That is what sociologists call a paper tiger. From a distance, she looked like a predator, powerful and dangerous. But up close, if you really looked, you could see she was made of nothing but thin, flammable layers of insecurity. She didn't hate me because I was poor. She hated me because I was real. I had survived a childhood that would have broken her in a week. I wore my history on my sleeve. While she spent millions of dollars trying to bury hers under limestone and imported silk, my authenticity made her feel like a fraud in her own house. So, she declared war. It wasn't a loud war. People like Victoria don't scream, they negotiate. They undermine. They suffocate. The wedding planning wasn't a celebration, it was a siege. Matthew and I wanted a small ceremony. Maybe 100 people. Close friends. Good food. Victoria smiled her shark smile and said, "Oh, darling, that simply won't do. The Sterlings have obligations." By the time the invitations went out, the guest list had swollen to 350 people. Senators, judges, business moguls, people I didn't know, people Matthew didn't like. It wasn't a wedding anymore, it was a coronation for Victoria. And I was just a prop she needed to endure. She hijacked the florist, canceling my simple arrangements and replacing them with $75,000 worth of white orchids. $75,000 on flowers that would die in a day. When I tried to object, she looked at me with those cold, pitying eyes and said, "Jessica, dear, please don't be difficult. You wouldn't understand the burden of legacy. Just be grateful we are handling the bill." She treated me like a stain. She was trying to scrub out of the family linen. She made appointments for me at her dermatologist, her stylist, her speech coach. Every gift was a criticism wrapped in a velvet bow. She was trying to paint over me, to turn me into another hollow copy of herself. But I wouldn't break. I wouldn't let her intimidate me. I just kept quiet, did my work, and held Matthew's hand when she wasn't looking. I thought that was the worst of it. I thought she was just a snob, a controlling narcissist who wanted a perfect photo op. I didn't realize that for a paper tiger, losing control is the ultimate threat. And when they feel threatened, they don't just scratch. They try to kill. I didn't know that the morning of the wedding, she would decide that painting over me wasn't enough. She decided she needed to erase me completely. On the morning of my wedding, The tension in the Sterling estate was thick enough to choke on. I was in the bridal suite, a cavernous room filled with antique furniture that felt more like a museum than a place to get ready. I was meticulously fixing a small chip on the frame of a gilded mirror, a nervous habit. When the door opened, Victoria swept in. She wasn't wearing her usual armor of judgment. Instead, she was wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, carrying a heavy, crystal decanter on a silver tray. "Jessica," she said, her voice dripping with faux sweetness. "I brought you something special. It is a family tradition. A tonic made from herbs grown right here on the estate. It calms the nerves. I want you to have a glass before the ceremony." She set the tray down on the vanity. "Consider it a peace offering. Welcome to the family." I thanked her, my stomach twisting. It felt wrong. Too easy. Too kind. But I played along. "Thank you, Victoria. That is very thoughtful." She lingered for a moment, adjusting a flower in a vase, her eyes scanning the room, scanning me. Before she finally turned and left, I waited until the door clicked shut. Then I turned back to the mirror I had been fixing. The angle was perfect. It reflected the entire room behind me, including the door. I didn't drink the tonic. I didn't even touch the decanter. I just went back to my work, my hands steady, my mind racing. 10 minutes later, the door opened again, very quietly. I didn't turn around. I watched in the reflection of the mirror. Victoria slipped back into the room. She thought I was in the bathroom. She moved quickly to the vanity. From the pocket of her silk robe, she pulled a small, dark vial. She uncorked it and poured the contents into the decanter. The liquid was thick, viscous, almost black. It vanished into the amber tonic instantly. She gave the decanter a quick swirl, recorked the vial, and slipped out as silently as she had entered. My heart was hammering against my ribs. I walked over to the vanity. I uncorked the decanter and took a cautious sniff. Beneath the herbal scent, there was something else, something acrid and metallic. I recognized it from my time in foster care, from a house where they used old-fashioned remedies that were more like punishments. It was a strong emetic, root of ipecac, or something similar, mixed with something else that smelled faintly hallucinogenic. Maybe Jimson weed. She wasn't trying to kill me. That would be too messy. She wanted something much more specific. She wanted me to be sick. Violently. Uncontrollably sick. She wanted me to vomit at the altar. Or during the first dance. She wanted me to hallucinate. To act crazy. To lose control of my body and my mind in front of 350 of her closest friends. She wanted to prove to everyone that I was exactly what she said I was: unstable. Low class. A disaster waiting to happen. She wanted to ruin my dignity so thoroughly that I could never recover. I stared at the decanter, the amber liquid catching the light. It was a trap, elegant and cruel. If I drank it, I lost. If I accused her, she would deny it, call me paranoid, say it was just herbs, and I would look crazy anyway. I was cornered, or so she thought, but she forgot one thing. I restore things for a living. I know how to take something broken and make it right, and I know that sometimes the best way to fix a picture is to change the perspective. I almost screamed. The rage was white hot, bubbling up from my chest, ready to explode. I wanted to storm out of the suite, find Matthew, find the police, find anyone who would listen, but then I stopped. I looked at my own reflection in the mirror. My face was flushed, my eyes wide with panic. If I ran out there now, screaming about poison and sabotage, what would happen? Victoria would play the confused, concerned mother. She would say I was hysterical, that it was just a tonic, that the stress of the wedding had finally broken me, and everyone would believe her, because she was Victoria Sterling, the pillar of the community, and I was just the foster kid who didn't belong. Screaming was exactly what she wanted. It played right into her narrative. It confirmed every whispered insult, every condescending glance. I took a deep breath, counting to 10. My pulse slowed. My mind cleared. I looked at the decanter again. The trap was set. But traps have a fatal flaw. They don't care who steps in them. I remembered the seating chart. I had stared at it for hours, trying to find a place for my few friends amidst the sea of senators and CEOs. The head table was a long, rectangulaire affaire. Matthew and I were in the center. To my left was Ashley, my maid of honor, and Matthew's sister, the only Sterling who treated me like a human being. To Matthew's right was his best man, and directly across from us, facing the crowd, were our parents. Victoria sat directly across from me. The glassware was identical, heavy, crystal goblets etched with the Sterling family crest. Victoria had insisted on using them for the head table. "It's tradition," she had said. I picked up my phone and sent a quick text to Ashley. "Make sure the videographer is set up for the live stream. Tell him to focus on the head table during the toasts. I have a surprise for Matthew." Ashley replied instantly with a thumbs up emoji. She didn't know the whole story, but she knew enough to trust me. The live stream was my idea. A way for my friends who couldn't afford to travel to Napa to still see the wedding. Victoria had hated it, calling it tacky. But Matthew had insisted. Now, it was my safety net. It was my witness. I walked out of the bridal suite, my head held high. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like a bride. The ceremony was a blur of white orchids and polite applause. I said my vows to Matthew, looking into his kind eyes, promising to love him, to honor him, to protect him. And I meant it. Protecting him meant protecting us from the poison in his own bloodline. Then came the reception. The ballroom was magnificent, a testament to Victoria's taste and budget. Crystal chandeliers, silk tablecloths, servers moving like ghosts. I sat at the head table, my hand in Matthew's, my heart pounding a steady, heavy rhythm against my ribs. The waiters poured the champagne, but for the head table, there was a special bottle, another tradition. I watched as a server approached with the decanter. Victoria caught my eye from across the table. She smiled, a small, tight expression that didn't touch her cold eyes. She nodded slightly at the decanter. A silent command. "Drink." The server poured a glass for me, then moved down the line. I waited. The room was buzzing with conversation, laughter, the clinking of silverware. Everyone was distracted. Photographers were flashing. Guests were finding their seats. It was chaos. Beautiful. Expensive ikawas. I leaned over to Matthew. "I'm just going to fix my train," I whispered. I stood up, moving around the back of the table. I pretended to adjust the heavy silk of my dress, creating a wall of white fabric between the table and the guests. My hands moved with the precision of a surgeon. I reached out and took my glass. In the same motion, I reached across the centerpiece and took Victoria's glass. It took less than 3 seconds. I didn't look at anyone. I didn't hesitate. I slid my glass into her spot, and hers into mine. The levels were identical. The crystal was identical. The only difference was the invisible, acrid truth hiding in the amber liquid. I sat back down. I smoothed my dress. I looked across the table. Victoria was busy charming a senator, her back to me. She hadn't seen a thing. No one had. The dignity of silence. That was my weapon. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to accuse. I just needed to adjust the geometry of the table. I looked at the glass in front of me, the clean, safe glass that had been meant for Victoria. And then I looked at the glass in front of her. The trap was armed. The target was locked. All I had to do was wait. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ's voice boomed over the speakers. "Please take your seats. It is time for the toasts." Victoria stood up. She smoothed her Chanel suit, checked her reflection in a spoon, and picked up her glass. The glass, she tapped it with a silver knife. The sharp ting-ting-ting cutting through the chatter. The room fell silent. 350 faces turned toward her. The red light on the videographer's camera blinked steady and bright. We were live. Family, friends, distinguished guests. Victoria began, her voice smooth as silk. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate this union." She paused, letting the word hang in the air with just a hint of distaste. She looked down at me. "To my son, Matthew, you have always been the light of my life." And to his new bride, Jessica. She flashed that predatory smile again. "Jessica, you're joining a family with a legacy, one built on strength, tradition, and purity. She lifted her glass so the amber liquid glowed under the lights. May you always remember the weight of the name you now carry. To the happy couple. The toast echoed around the room. Victoria drank. So did I my glass. The clean one. She swallowed. Poised and regal as ever. And then the clock started ticking. Within a minute, her body began to register what she had swallowed. I sat still. Hands folded neatly. Watching her as though monitoring a chemical reaction, she kept smiling for the crowd. But I saw the fractures that twitched beneath her eye. The sudden sheen of sweat that makeup couldn't hide. Her hand trembled as she reached for her water. The ice chiming in the glass. At 2 minutes, the mask slipped. Her sharp, calculating gaze went unfocused. She touched her throat. Confused. Disoriented. Richard leaned in, asking if she was all right. But the hallucinogen answered before she could. She pushed her chair back with a shriek, staring at her immaculate designer suit as though it were crawling with insects. Get them off, she screamed, clawing at invisible contamination. The room froze. Hundreds of guests, musicians, servers, everyone arrested by the spectacle of the woman who ruled Napa society reduced to terror. She recoiled even from her husband, insisting he was coated in filth, seeing horrors that weren't there. Then the second component hit. Her complexion turned a ghastly gray. She gagged, tried to hold herself together. To protect the perfect image she valued more than her own well-being, but nature didn't negotiate with ego. She lurched forward and vomited across the extravagant orchid centerpiece she'd chosen to showcase her superiority. Gasps rippled through the ballroom as she collapsed to her knees, retching until only humiliation remained. When she looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. She stared directly into the camera, recording the entire event. This wasn't just a loss of dignity, it was the collapse of a self-made deity. Her identity depended entirely on admiration. Now, stripped of control, she was unraveling. She tried to stand but slipped, dragging the tablecloth down with her. Crystal shattered. Wine spilled. She fell into the chaos, covered in the wreckage of her own making. And then she looked at me, calm, untouched. She understood. I hadn't poisoned her. She had prepared the poison herself. I had simply redirected it. When paramedics arrived, she was incoherent, rambling about spiders and contamination. I handed them the vial I had retrieved earlier, a mixture of ipecac and Jimson weed she had intended for me. Matthew was horrified, confused, struggling to reconcile what he'd witnessed with the mother he knew. She poisoned herself. I told him quietly, I just made sure the right glass reached the right lips. In the aftermath, Victoria was placed on psychiatric hold. Her reputation, once untouchable, evaporated the moment the videos hit the internet. 6 months later, her husband had filed for divorce, and she was tucked away in a private facility overseas. Her reign was over. Matthew and I left the estate behind. We bought a small house near the coast, a little imperfect, but honest. I continued my work restoring damaged art, uncovering the truth beneath layers of grime. People ask whether I regret what happened. I don't. I didn't destroy her. I simply reflected her back to herself. Sometimes revenge is nothing more than letting someone sip from their own cup and letting the truth do the rest.